Hello, and welcome to the allure of fashion and the intrigue of great books. Today's episode is an exploration of divine vintage. I'm your host, Wendy Kendall. The result of my love of fashion, and especially my passion for purses, mystery, and romance, are the books I've authored in the intriguing In Pursuit mysteries. Cat Out of the Bag, Cat with a K, introduces Catherine Watson, purse designer, sleuth. As Catherine moves from designer bags to body bags, she's uncovering clues to a murder. The prequel, Pistachio Makes a Splash, delves into a chilling cold case. Finalist for Best Romantic Suspense at Killer Nashville, Snow Kiss Cookies to Die For creates a tangle of mystery and love. A summer read that will keep you on the edge of your beach towel. Cherry Shakes in the Park blends danger, divas, and frothy delights. And Ribbons of Love run through Heart of Christmas, Cookies and Dreams. Thank you so much to all the readers who told me how much they enjoyed my books. After we go in pursuit of fashion, please check my website, wendywritesbooks.com. Sandra L. Young's love of vintage fashion inspired her to write a debut novel, Divine Vintage. She's gathered her own impressive vintage collections spanning the late 1800s to 1980s, wearing pieces on stage through years of performing in community theater. She also sports her fashions out on the town for special occasions. Sandra Young's debut novel, Divine Vintage, tells a story about Tess Burton, owner of a vintage boutique. When she models an Edwardian trousseau gown, an amazing time phenomenon occurs, and her mind becomes open to witnessing events of a century-old murder. Most shocking is that her version of the murder disputes local lore, creating intense interest in proving what really happened. Sandra is on an exciting journey to pay tribute to the wonder of vintage clothing. Welcome, Sandra Young, in pursuit of fashion and fiction.
Thank you, Wendy. I look forward to talking with you because we both have a pursuit of fashion. That is our brand, and that is our novel. So this is going to be fun.
Listeners, this woman really knows and loves vintage fashion. She lives the passion. Sandy, you have a tremendous personal collection of vintage clothes. Can you show us an overview of your impressive collection beyond what you're already wearing? And tell us about your joy in collecting. Maybe give us a show and tell on a couple of your favorites?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I really started collecting about 30 years ago because I started doing community theater and wearing costumes and just got intrigued by it and decided I wanted to own some pieces myself. And that's when things were cheap. And I could go to Goodwill or Salvation Army or estate sales for $1. I could get a box lot of clothing. I should have bought up everything. But as it was, I ended up with a great size collection that fills a bedroom. And right now, what you see behind me is just a small portion of it. I'll flip around and show you more of it, but I've got everything from 1880s to 1990s, which is now considered vintage, and from dresses to coats to underwear to hats and jewelry, really, you name it. I have a little bit or a lot of everything in my collection, and it really has become my passion. And with my books, I have been able to wrap that around my genres and have a lot of fun with it. So I'll quickly flip you around so we don't forget. And here is one of my racks that's got all kinds of eras in it.
Oh my goodness.
That's
oh my
one,
gosh.
one of 3 industrial clothing racks. But what I picked out for you today behind me to look at, I'm really partial to dressing gowns. And the green, the brocade, And then the pin dot pink long satin. Those are 1940s dressing gowns. And so I just love those. And then the dresses are 30s. And you've got, it's a purple and it's got this beautiful draped, it's like a crepey, real thin velvety with a draped back line. And then the other one is a heavy velvet with beautiful pearls that's on it. And let's see, 3 of those things up there were given to me as gifts. People tend to give me gifts rather than, other their pieces. Rather, this is another piece, a little fun 60s that I'm wearing today.
Oh, love that. It looks so summery too.
That's why I put it on. I figured flowers and my second book, Divinely Dramatic, has a 1966 mystery. So this one is in honor of that one because it will publish later this year.
Oh, congratulations. That's so exciting. Super
Thank you.
exciting. Oh, wow. Well, okay. And I'm just going to say, Sandy, your book, Divine Vintage, is such a fun read. When it comes to fashion, it always amazes me the power of memories that fashion evokes. So, like, for example, I like to talk purses. So, a purse's style is special because you remember maybe your mother carrying it, or you remember as a child your grandmother carried candy treats in her purse that she'd let you reach in to find. Fashion memories can be so powerful. Now, your character, Tess, has just moved to her new home and opened her dream vintage store. As an author, you have come up with a terrific premise that at the touch or when wearing vintage clothes, Tess can feel aspects of the life of who owned and wore that fashion before. What first inspired you with this idea? And can you tell us a little more about Tess and perhaps about one of her favorite vintage pieces?
My inspiration, interestingly, was really I came out of a dream one night and just had this little inkling of something with vintage clothing I really hadn't actually written in like 30 years. I've been doing theater. I was working and doing theater like 5 shows a year, and that consumed me. So I always loved to write, but I just pushed that aside. So suddenly these stories are in my head, and they became 3 linked novellas, which is my series that's now moving through with the Wild Rose Press. And the first one, I just every spare moment I had, I was typing, so happy. And Tessa's story from the very beginning. Her store was called Divine Vintage. I just knew that, and I knew her, and and moved on to the others. But through the years, because that's been a few years ago that I started them, I became a better writer. I spent time learning and studying and really improving my writing. So I would go back to these stories. And I actually made Divine Vintage a mystery where it wasn't initially. She knew who did it. We knew. And I decided I love mystery. Why isn't this a mystery? So I built this 1913 dual timeline into it and built mysteries into each of them. So I felt that it made it much more compelling to have the romance, the mystery, and what I call the ghostly sizzle. And Tess, she's a courageous character. All of my characters are vibrant, strong, fun women, and the lead characters, but I do joint points of view. So the male gets a point of view too. And her courage comes from she's moving to this new town to open a business. And yet she's also got a lack of confidence because a former relationship was very manipulative. He was controlling, and he didn't believe in her, and he just kind of chipped away at her. So now she's got to overcome these things, and it's called psychometry, touching something, getting a vibe from it like that, really explodes with this Edwardian dress, and the connection to the mansion where Phoebe and Edward live. And at that point, she's got to delve into this new realm of having this interesting and challenging new, talent, power, as you will. Now, Tess, let's see, for her, let's see if you can see down. Can you see down here? There is I may have to go grab it. There is a cardigan sweater. She wears cardigan sweaters. And there is this one. Could be one that has could have really Just like this sweater.
Wow, look at the intricate work on that. That's incredible.
Isn't that fun?
Just gorgeous. Love that. Oh my gosh. Tess has great taste like you.
Oh, she does. She does. She wears vintage a lot too. That's an advertisement for her.
Yeah. Well, Tess feels those memories from an Edwardian period trousseau gown. Can you describe for us a little bit about the fashions from the Edwardian period?
It's one of my favorite eras. I really love the kind of that Titanic era. If you think of that, then that is 1913 when the dual timeline is set. And I pulled an illustration. I have this up. I have this. This is actually 1914 fashions, and you can see that unlike the Victorian era where you had the skirts came out and they were long and full, you narrowed down. They called them hobble skirts. They narrowed down greatly. And whereas women were so layered and covered up with petticoats and all the different underwear, with these, there wasn't room for that. So suddenly there's a new freedom in that era. And they did do some of this cool layering with the longer tunic over the hobble skirt. And I love that look.
Oh,
I just think, and
yes.
big, impressive hats.
Oh,
That was
yes.
another really, really fun thing. And I think fashion, it mirrors the times. It mirrors people and what people are, how they are working, how they are behaving. And this was a time when women's suffrage was really catching strong fire. It'd been around for many decades, but it took a long time to get that traction. Now it's going to be another few years until it's passed. But at the same time, you have a lot of women fighting for their voting rights. So, they're throwing off the restrictions of that older clothing, although they're still in corsets.
Mhm.
And they're wearing an S curve corset at this time, which, puffs out their kind of powder pigeon bust. They have their little narrow waist and it rounds their hips, but they walk, it's kind of an S curve, they called it. So those were the really aspects of that later Edwardian era that set it apart.
Oh, that's so interesting. Oh, wow. The original owner of the Edwardian gown is Phoebe, who is new or was newly married to Edward. So this is back in history. There's a delightful scene before their wedding where Phoebe is trying on fashions with her mother, who expresses caution over a particular dress because the pneumonia dresses were so sheer. Phoebe, however, is not concerned. She's feeling that life is to be lived and enjoyed. Can you talk to us about writing this fun scene between generations and their different fashion views?
Well, and I love Phoebe. I really built her out when I added that dual timeline, and I loved her character. I wanted her to be saucy and be more modern, in her views and a little and freer. Now, her mom is a product of Victorian eras, so she's still that more laced up. And even though it's conservative Midwest, because I base my books in Michigan City, in the county I live in Indiana. And so, it would have been more conservative, but Phoebe's like, these sheer pneumonia dresses are something I want to wear. I want to express my individuality, my personality, and I'm going to top with this big, lovely picture hat. And mom is like, oh, she's so caught in that Victorianism, and wanting her to be cautious. But that's, they get along well. All of my books, I was actually thinking, they have a little mother-daughter tension at times, but their overall relationships are very respectful and loving. And that's really what you often find in real life. And the fashions change, the generations change, and what your mom wore is not what you wear. And it's almost that rebellion and that breaking free to the next generation.
It's so well described. And it's such a fun scene overall, too. Well, Trey becomes a love interest for Tess and vice versa. He's a little wary of her passion for fashion and her connection to the past. The mystery is enticing for him, though, and so they do join forces investigating, especially after they turn up an old diary that's full of additional insights. When Tess models Phoebe's gown, Trey also models Edward's suit. Can you describe men's Edwardian fashion just a little bit, but tell us
Sure.
also about Trey?
Men's fashions are never as interesting as women's. They just aren't. But the interesting thing about that is that the men's silhouettes really kind of paralleled the women's. Someone who was fashionable, more of a dandy at the time, um, the pants really narrowed. They came down to a narrower hem at the ankle. And the jackets were also a little longer and a little more fitted. They weren't big and bulky, like the big shoulder pads and loose and everything. It was kind of a fitted, narrower silhouette. So I was thinking how, if you got a really fashionable couple and you put them together on the street, he in that suit and she in one of the styles I showed you, wouldn't they just look so well matched walking along? But as for Trey, he's the descendant of Edward, who was the accused murderer in 1913. So he actually has a real vested interest in, solving this mystery to find out if Edward's really guilty or not. So that helps to drive him. But at the same time, he is an architect. He is a logical man. And this whimsy of Tess saying, I see visions and I see, this in the past, really make him go, whoa. I mean, this woman is very gorgeous and I'm very interested in her and drawn to her, but I don't know if she's even sane. So, but he does, he suspends that disbelief. He goes, okay, I'll give her a chance. And then as the story would have it, Edward and Phoebe are such strong characters. They have such strong energy from the past that Trey he finds that he can, despite the fact he does not want to, he can also see Edward's point of view in the past. So you're getting this dual timeline through both of them through their eyes. And I love those characters. I love Tess and Trey.
They're incredible characters, and I love how skilled you are at giving us both of their point of views too, because their point of views are very different, and it's just a great read in that way.
Oh, thank you. And I love Phoebe and Edward too. It's just your characters. That, Wendy, when you write Kat and others, it's just like your characters. You're just like, oh, they're my friends, my family.
Well, they do become the reader's friends too. I felt like, I was really rooting for them to, clear this person's name and everything, so it's a vital read. And
Thank you.
speaking of which, will you do me a favor? Will you treat our listeners to a reading from your book, Divine Vintage?
Absolutely. I would be
you.
glad to do that. We're going to start it just right at the beginning when Tess is opening Divine Vintage for the very first time to the public. It's a huge moment for her, and she's with her assistant, Marcy. Tess Burton swept a handful of frothy fabric up to the mid-morning light that streamed through the shop's bay window. The flapper gown was perfect, with no moth holes or stains. Cradling the dress in both hands, she walked toward her new assistant. I let my heart rule. I pushed my price limit when I bought this yesterday. Attending auctions and estate sales was a perk of her new adventure. On this sunny Tuesday in early May, they were prepping to offer Divine Vintage's finds to Michigan City, Indiana. Tessa's smile faded in recalling the responsibilities attached to a new business, a decades-old building, a very part-time employee, and a bank loan. Her fingers tightened on the dress. She'd taken a massive risk in opening the shop. If Divine Vintage failed, she'd lose her dream career along with her inheritance. She could end up a bag lady at 28, wandering the streets with a knockoff knapsack. She tried to shove back the insecurities and reached the glass case that served as a central display and checkout counter. Don't panic, focus on the positives. You sure can't beat shopping in the name of business, she said, though she would have to avoid future splurges. One hand on a stack of beaded sweaters, Marcy Alexander paused. She straightened to a height of 6 feet, her slim yet curvy frame topped by a mass of curling auburn hair. Imagine a 1920s debutante floating down a staircase. It's such a showstopper. Oh, that dress is worth every cent. I totally agree. I can't resist a garment when history speaks to me. Without a warning, Tess found herself submerged into a vision of the beaded aqua gown swishing around the calves of the first proud owner. An elusive tune played in her ears, followed by a burst of laughter. Her breathing sped up as if she were dancing a foxtrot with a dashing partner. As she and the man twirled toward the center of the dance floor, an exotic fragrance wafted from the fabric of the dress. Tess clutched the dress to her chest. She spun in a wide circle. The sound and scent faded. She stopped and blinked. The world came back into focus. Yes, she really was standing in the middle of her new shop 10 minutes before their initial opening. Marcy clapped her hands, jangling the stacked bracelets on her wrist. You're the belle of the ball. She grinned, resumed folding a sweater. To calm the lingering sense of dizziness, Tess dipped her head and hid her relief. Marcy's artistic leanings left her unbothered by her boss's sometimes quirky behavior. Others might label her a nut job. She had never shared how her imagination soared when she handled the most appealing vintage items. Trying on a wedding gown that dripped with lace, she'd experienced the radiant confidence of a 1950s bride. Steaming a chiffon prom dress called up a nervous, perspiring teen with a beehive hairdo. And these were never fleeting images, but deeper, heart-tugging responses. She experienced an unexplainable empathy where, for a few pulsing seconds, she almost became these women.
Wow. I mean, I know you all want to go right out and get it, keep reading. That is so good. Thank you so much for that reading.
Oh, I love doing that. Thank you. It's like where to stop. You leave them on a little place where, hey, you know her power, and Trey's gonna walk in the door soon. So you want to go in there for that sexy sizzle.
That's exactly right. Yes, Trey's entrance is definitely quite the entrance. Yes. Well, can you tell us a little bit about the extensive research that you do for historical fiction to get the setting, the fashion, and the characters right?
Well, for this series of 3 books, it's been somewhat easier because I set them in my county. And so I'm researching the dual timelines, 1913. I had to look back, for instance, to see, were they still sledding in 1913? Well, yes, they were. And what kind of car would Edward, who was a rich man with a shipping firm, what would he be driving? And just to double check the fashions and various things, because you want to be correct in the era. And one of the other things I find with that and my 1966 mystery in Divinely Dramatic, and then there's a 1979 mystery in the third book, is slang and verbiage.
Oh,
You do not want to use a slang expression that did not exist in that time frame because it could pull people right out. So I'm very careful with language. And I wrote my dual timeline, like my 1913, in a much more formal style. And so now, speaking of research, I had just started a new historical fiction. I'm 70 plus pages into it, another real life heiress from Indiana. And it's a fascinating story, but you talk research, I'm having to really learn about her and her family and the neighbors and the times and the actual towns, because I can't make everything up now. I have to immerse it. I want to immerse it in reality. Now, am I making up some relationships? Of course, you have to. Nobody knows all that happened, and you have to build, historical fiction writers have to build that extra, tension and stakes in there. So I'm adding some characters that, didn't exist. But anyway, I'm just finding, wow, the research is taking as much time as the writing. I'm trying to write, and then I go down a rabbit hole of something small like, what, did they have Christmas lights on their trees? Well, yes, if they were rich in 1901, they did.
it's so amazing too how artistically you weave all this history into the reading. Like, I don't feel like I'm reading a history book. It's just woven right into the story. And so, I pick it up, but it's fascinating. It's so interesting.
Yeah, we never want to dump backstory so much that we slow people down, right? We want them to be able to grasp, like a cat with her purses. You want to, talk about her various purses, but you have to keep people moving. You have to keep your pace, or people will go, you've lost me.
Yes. Well, you mentioned your book about the 1960s and everything, and at some point you have referenced a London designer, Mary Quant. One of her contributions to fashion was the mini skirt. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about this designer?
I mentioned Mary Quant in Divine Vintage because she was iconic. She was considered the first to really bring out the mini skirt. And of course, that was in the 60s. And it again was a big time of change. You know, those hemlines went up and women were really just, and men too. I mean, the younger generation was really busting out. There was a lot of civil unrest. There were protests. There was Vietnam War. There was rock and roll and peace and free love and all kinds of things, you know. So these miniskirts embodied that, hey, we're breaking away from this old, you know, 50s is still pretty staid fashion. You've got longer skirts and some of the 60s too, but you know, then those mini skirts crept up with Mary Quant. And she just actually passed away within, I think, the last month.
Oh,
And but she left her mark, most definitely, with that. And nowadays you still see the mini skirts. I mean, certainly we wear less clothing now than people decades ago would have ever dreamed possible.
well, what is your own favorite fashion to wear? Maybe a favorite outfit or accessory that you have, and why is that your favorite? It's probably hard to choose.
It is hard to choose because I have such a vast collection, and and I keep adding to it too. I mean, I honestly, I don't buy retail. It's too expensive. Someday I have sold my stuff off way too cheap to friends who have shops. But right now, the stuff I pick up, there were a couple of local theater groups that sold off part of their costumes. And I went in and for $1, everything was like $1, and they were selling true vintage. And of course, you know, I load up.
Nicely
Because
done.
and then people keep giving me, as I said, people keep giving me things because they don't want to give it to Goodwill. Their families don't want it. They don't want to haul around anymore. So I just keep adding, and yeah, I don't find it possible to pinpoint. I will show you one necklace though. I really do
Yeah, give us one.
adore,
Give us one.
because this really is kind of it's such a
Oh, oh
beautiful, it's a
gosh.
beautiful old piece.
Look at the light on it. Oh, it's gorgeous.
It's gorgeous. I don't think it's true emerald and topaz, but you know, I've never had it looked at. It could be, but I truly don't think so. But
It's just gorgeous.
it's very old.
Now,
And
now, do you also have a favorite purse? I have to ask.
I also have many cool purses. I was going to quickly, because since you're such an aficionado, I was going to show you some of my very oldest ones. Here is a, a bag purse that has beads.
Oh, I love the beaded. Oh, and look at the fringe.
Yeah, so this is
Gorgeous.
very old. This one has this really cool metal
Oh,
piece that's hung
wow.
from velvet, beaded on one side, velvet on the other.
Ah,
This one is a long velvet
yes.
with beads,
Oh,
and
look at that.
it's got a long fringe. Now, I
Oh,
don't
that was
carry
very
those,
fashionable.
but I do if I'm dressed up and going to something, you know, some kind of special event, needs a fancier purse. I have carried this. It will
Little,
fit a cell phone.
little glittery. I love the glittery.
Yes.
Yes.
So these are purses that I actually carry, but I do have several fun purses as well.
It can be difficult to find a vintage purse that you can put your phone in. I will say that they
Yes.
did not have that foresight.
No, that is a problem. Sometimes I go through several. I'm like, nope, nope, not fitting.
Well, I do want to show off quickly just a wonderful vintage purse that you were talking about people giving you vintage. This is a Hattie Carnegie. I want to make sure that I get it in here. Clutch my sister gave me. You can see the gorgeous interior sateen material, a little zippered pocket.
What fun.
And yes, and she was an incredible designer from the 1940s. This purse is from the 1940s. And it's got just this exquisite detailing in the leather. Its weaving is so soft to the touch and just a classic design. Chic and glamorous, which is exactly what Hattie Carnegie went for. An incredible life story. Born in 1886, Henrietta Cannon Geyser. Her family immigrated from Vienna when she was a child. She was the second of 7 children. And she, in her early 20s, took the surname Carnegie as an homage to Andrew Carnegie, the richest person in the US at the time, perhaps an indication of her own ambitions. She started her fashions in a partnership with another woman, Rose Roth, and they started with a hat making business. But by 1919, Hattie was off on her own. And she was a leading figure in American fashion for more than 4 decades with wealthy socialite clientele, including Mrs. William Randolph Hearst, Mrs. Vanderbilt, and Wallace Simpson. And she definitely had an eye for talent. Her company discovered some of the most prominent American fashion designers of the 20th century. And for applying her design sense to the women's Army Corps WAC uniform, she received the Congressional Medal of Freedom. So worldwide, the 1930s saw women designers move to the forefront of fashion, while the 1940s saw American fashion emerge from the shadow of Paris couture to establish its own unique identity. And Hattie Carnegie helped to define that American look. In her own words, there's really no Carnegie look. There's only the you look. My clothes are built to show off the woman who wears them, to move with the times and a little ahead of the times. That has always been my aim. So that's where that is. Sandra, thank you so much for sharing this fashion and fiction fun with us. It's wonderful for everyone to know the research and thought and artistry that goes into the many different ways there are to tell the stories. Can you tell us what's coming up next for your readers to look forward to?
Divinely Dramatic, that's Marcy. That's the shop assistant's story. It's around costuming at a community theater, the importance of being earnest. So we have costumes from 1895, another fun era. And again, 1966 mystery. And then the third book is in, I'm coming close to finishing the sequel and pushing it out to hopefully go through the publication process too. So I'm going to keep writing just as you are and having such a blast. And would love it if people did give a try to Divine Vintage. And my website, sandrayoungauthor.com, got some pictures of fashions on there, and people can keep in touch and on the upcoming books too.
Yes, I just want to add this book. If I haven't said it already, this book is highly recommended. So look for it as soon as you can get it. And oh, thank you, Sandra, so much. Listeners, you will definitely want to check out all the interesting fashion information as well as book information at Sandra's website, sandrayoungauthor.com. And definitely find out more about her books. And you're invited to my website, wendywritesbooks.com, also to explore more on fashion and fiction. Thank you, listeners, for joining us. Be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And join me next time for the allure of fashion and the intrigue of great books.